Thank you very much, Denny. Although it makes me sad for the reason we're speaking here today, I'm honored to say a few words about my friend, Governor Booth Gardner. A lot of people will remember us as adversaries, and that's true for a brief time. We ran against each other for governor in 1984, and I lost. Now, it might come as a surprise to you, but I didn't particularly like losing. And so after the election, I went off to a place I had up in the San Juan Islands to lick my wounds on Lopez Island. It's exactly there that Booth found me a few days later. He called and said, I'm going to be up in the area. I have a place over on Shaw Island, and I'll come over and see you. And so he drove his boat over, and we met. I had a 40-acre farm, and we walked around the property 4 times, talking about our visions, about the state, about the election, about the campaign, and where we wanted the state to go, because Booth and I both love the state of Washington. By the time we landed on my front doorstep, we'd solved all of Washington's problems. Booth had a unique characteristic, which I think Denny alluded to, and that is, we had a senator in the state by the name of Warren Magnuson who used to say, you can get a lot of things done if you don't care who gets the credit for them. Booth really did believe that. And I'd been working on the basic health plan for the working poor in the state for a number of years before he got to be governor. And I hadn't been able to get it through the Republican governor and the Republicans in the legislature. It was my passion project, giving the poor who fell outside of Medicaid but were working an opportunity to buy into the healthcare system in some way. It was one of those gaps between what the federal government did and what the private insurers and the employers were doing, and there were lots of people who were working full-time but couldn't get healthcare. And so we put together this program. He told me that day when we were walking around, he would do everything he could to get it passed, and he kept his word. Also unusual in politicians. He put everything he had into it. And when it was finished, he signed it in the middle of my district in a little clinic called Country Doctor in the middle of the city on Capitol Hill. That bill has helped the working poor of Washington all over the state get Medicaid, medical care, and is one of the first public options. It's so good for the state of Washington that Senator Cantwell took it and put it into the Affordable Care Act. It's now in the blueprint for the safety net that we are developing in this session of Congress. So Booth lived on beyond his days. His ideas, his willingness to make something happen, it carried into the forward, and he never walked around telling anybody about it, just did it. That walk with me, a couple of rivals, was really the beginning of it all. And it wasn't only health care. I was the Ways and Means Chairman in the Senate, so I had a lot to do with how the budget got put together. But you don't care if you're the Ways and Means Chairman or not. If the governor won't sign it, you can't get it passed. So he and I had lots of talks. He was willing to sign a bill that created the largest settlement for women workers in this country under an equal pay for equal work. He signed it after a lawsuit that the state had lost, and I convinced him that we ought to settle the case and let women move ahead in the workplace. And Booth said, good idea. Finding a partner like Booth, one who's willing to get past politics and jump in the deep end with you on some issues that weren't exactly sort of centrist. Sometimes he took some real risks, is not a very common thing in politics. But with Booth, it was common. The best interest of the state always came first. Although occasionally I would go over to his office to find him, and they would say, well, he's gone. Well, where is he? Well, he's gone up to coach his girls' soccer team in Tacoma. He had all kinds of interests and all kinds of concerns about kids, and he was willing to put everything he had into it, both in the office and out of the office. Now, some of his most important work, in my view, and what shows his real character and why I feel bad today, is that when he left the governor's mansion, he was in apparently good shape as far as we knew, went off to Geneva to work for the GATT trade organization, and while he was over there, the diagnosis was made of Parkinsonism. Parkinsonism is a very, very difficult disease to cope with. Your mind is active, everything's active, your body just won't cooperate. And Booth had this disease and struggled with it for 20 years, as you heard. Now, death is a frightening thing for all of us to think about. None of us want to think about death. It's not something that's usual table conversation or much of a conversation out here on the floor. But Booth was willing to look at it straight on. And he was willing to talk about it in a way that few other people were. He wanted to talk about what people's options were. And he saw the suffering. He was going through it himself and felt that everyone should have the right to choose how they want to end their life. In a final directive, when you go into the hospital, you tell them whether you want them to resuscitate you or not. All of that, he looked at all of that, and the one thing that was obvious to him was that there comes a time when there is no hope, and there is no question when it's going to happen, and people ought to have the right to make their own decision at that point. It's called death with dignity. Now, he took that issue on. There's a man who's struggling with a debilitating disease of his own. No political advantage whatsoever in doing it. None. But he came and spent his time. He was sick. It was hard for him to get up and talk. Sometimes he could only talk a few sentences. Then someone else would have to take the podium because he was unable to continue. There weren't any donors watching. There was no elections to be prepared for. It wasn't even an issue that affected him directly, because the requirement of the law was that you had to have 2 doctors say that you had only 6 months to live. And with Parkinsonism, it's not possible for any physician to say that. So it wasn't something he was doing for himself. It was because he thought it was right for the people of the state of Washington. You rarely find someone with that ability to get out of their own self-interest. He just believed in it. He believed it was best for the people of Washington, and he wasn't going to let his sickness or anything else stop him from getting it done. And it passed by about a 54% majority. Booth was a great man. They say they pass twice, once when they die, and once when people stop telling stories about him. The stories will never stop about Booth. I could stand up here and tell them for a long time. But he was a great man. He was a good governor. He was a good father. He was a good husband. And he was my partner and my friend, and I'll miss him very much. Rest in peace, Booth.